Alright, so how web apps work, I'm just basically going to give you an overview of what we're going to be going over the next 12 weeks, and just ask any questions that you guys want to ask about how something works. This is pretty much a 30,000 foot view of how the web works and how web apps actually work from the ground up. So we're going to discuss request response, which is HTTP, and just the role of certain things. What front end is versus what's back end. So there's a lot of terminology I'm going to get you guys up to speed on, and that's used in the industry. And just what databases are, what frameworks exactly do for us, what they don't do for us, and things such as libraries like jQuery or the framework that we're going to be learning, Laravel, and your typical path as a developer. So at the heart of every web application is a request and a response. The server is the one who's responding to a request, and the request could be from your browser, your smartphone, some kind of device that goes out and talks to another machine, in this case the server. And so the server's job is just to give you back whatever you requested. For example, if you go to google.com, the Google server is going to go there. If you go to CNN, the CNN server is going to give you back this web page. And so everything that we do is in this request response model. And what happens in the server inside could totally be different things. And we'll get to more details of that a bit later. So when a response comes back to the browser only understands HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like natively, that's all it knows. Anything else is really a plugin. For example, YouTube videos, that's all Flash. And so that's a plugin built in on top of the browser. And that's why you have to install it, and you got to install Java and whatnot. But at its core, all browsers just understand those three things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And there are differences between what versions of HTML we deal with, but that's more of a lecture for tomorrow, like the differences between versions of HTML. So with new things such as HTML5, there is some native video and audio, but there's a whole war right now going on what format that should be, and it's not really up to us to decide that, but we just have to deal with the consequences of that.
When is it going to be finalized?
Never.
It's still going on.
Right. It's because like proprietary licensing, and like Apple wants its own browsers to do the MP4, and then they make more money if people make more MP4s, and blah, 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 and I just don't have time for it. We don't have time for it. We want to build a site for people, right? Mm-hmm. And as many people as possible. So we have to do things in like 3 different audio and 3 different video sources to like make sure it accommodate for that. It's a pain in the butt, but what's our end goal? So these 3 work together, and they are the heart and soul of your web application. So the HTML. We'll drill into this. HTML, it's a lot like a blueprint for your house. And I forgot, James, that you saw a lot of this earlier. But essentially, when you build a foundation of a house, you kind of already know what rooms you're going to be building, and it just helps you label things and say that, hey, I want to work with this block of HTML that's labeled the kitchen or the bedroom or the garage. And it just helps us narrow down and identify what piece of the application we want to touch. And everything's based around this model of it being a document, a living document that you can modify using CSS or JavaScript. And that's how they know, I only want my garage door to be green or red, and that's what using CSS is for. But it needs to know that, hey, it only applies to my green garage door, to give us specificity, if I can say that correctly. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what exactly the role of HTML is, very, very quickly. And the role of CSS is just to provide the lipstick and make it look all pretty and whatnot. So if we look at CSS Zen Garden, this is just a style sheet, and all the styles applied to it are different. but the base HTML document is the same. So if you can quickly see this, CSS is very powerful in styling. And this is one of the actually first websites to like kind of showcase and get people to use CSS. So I think it's a great place to explore. It's using a little bit, JavaScript animations and whatnot, but you can also make your own theme to this and just play with it. I am not a CSS master, but I use it enough to like get by, to applying fixes to tickets that come in, and I don't specialize in turning Photoshop documents into workable HTML CSS, but typically someone works with a front-end developer who is like an expert in that field and helps come up with the structure, whereas the back-end developer, you take that structure and you say, I want to modify my garage, for example, back into that that layout again. So we'll get more detail about exactly what's meant by front end and back end, but I just wanted to show you that CSS garden page. And JavaScript, really the role of that is, let's say I want to move the garage door up and down or open the windows. Anything that provides animation, you can manipulate the document directly, programmatically through JavaScript. CSS is applied only to the look and feel of certain things, and like images or background color. And JavaScript allows you to turn that on or off if by pressing a button, clicking on a certain corner. So that's what gives us a lot of power to be able to manipulate the project, the document on the fly. So it's famous for alert boxes, which is really annoying, and you can prompt user for things such as like their name or something like that. And really good uses of JavaScript is like, for example, Google Maps or Gmail. If you remember back a long time ago, like MapQuest, you'd have to like click on another image to like zoom, another level, versus Google Maps where you just kind of drag the map around and it kind of fills it as you go. So that's using a lot of JavaScript. And it's a lot more fluid and makes it feel like more like a actual application rather than just another website that has to reload the page. So you've learned on Coding Academy, but there's a lot of Code Academy, but there's a lot of resources to it. The HTML.com is something I like to look up, and W3 Schools. You can all go ahead.
I think Code Academy and Code Academy are different.
Okay, sorry, I meant the pre-work was what? I'm sorry.
Code Academy.
Yeah, Code Academy. Sorry. And who? Do you guys own the Ducket books that we recommended, or okay? So I really like them. So you can learn a lot more background material through those books, and he actually has a really good breakdown of how the internet works, like with the DNS servers. Have you seen that chapter? And it's okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So with what we're going to be doing, are we going to be doing more like front end work or back end work? Or are we just going to be doing kind of both?
We're kind of doing both, kind of full spectrum. So I'm
Okay.
just giving you like a overview of all of them.
Okay, cool.
And there's a lot more resources on the internet, and we're going to utilize those because there's no point in me having to recreate all that when they've spent all the time and energy into doing so, and they may explain a concept better than I can. And I'm here to like just help navigate where you get stuck. It's like, oh, make a left here, make a right there, Yeah. And you might find a resources that I'm not aware of. So. And yeah, there's a ton of others, but I really like the Head First series. Some of that may seem older, but a lot of the principles and fundamentals behind it are all the same. Any other questions you guys may have? But yeah, I really highly recommend that either you buy, borrow, or steal, those books. I don't condone stealing, but that was a joke.
Wow. You wouldn't download a car.
Yeah. So I'll bring my copies of those books, for you guys to use here. But I use them more as a reference or something supplemental.
I mean, I have it as PDF.
Cool.
That's perfect.
See that's where it goes in like stealing. You know, digital stealing is the same as physically stealing. They have a copy. I have a copy. Yeah.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, so on the Duckett book, he goes into like for the when he talks about HTML tags.
Mhm.
He talks about like an address tag for when you are mentioning an address.
Mhm.
Like a name tag maybe. So like if you ever hover over the name, it'll give you the full name. Like it's just stuff that I have not seen yet.
Yeah, I think those are newer to HTML5.
Are they newer or are they ignored?
I think they're newer, like the address tag specifically.
Abbreviation tag.
Oh, the abbreviation tag.
Yeah.
That's been around a while.
So those in the site tag
Mhm.
are these things that
There's a lot of new tags out there that not all browsers support just yet.
okay.
You know, so but he does teach you some pretty good fundamentals, like how exactly does that work, or like what an attribute is, and he breaks it down really well. So you're not ever reading more than like a paragraph over something, and I love that because I hate those really thick technical manuals. Yeah, you know what I mean, like that 900-page whatever. It's so really dry and boring. So, yeah, there's plenty other resources out there, but these are like the best I've found to get you to learn as quickly as possible. And I'm a visual learner, so I don't know how you guys learn, but I'm still trying to discover that, you know, for the purposes of this course, and trying to accommodate as much as possible to auditory learners and like people hands-on, and then the visual learners like me. So, all right, so let's define what front-end web development is, and so anything that requires HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that's considered front end. And you build an interface for the user to interact with. For example, you know, this car radio, this is a user interface. What's great about this is that, you know, when you turn certain things, the volume or the channel changes, and the user really doesn't have to know how that works in the background. Like, this is connected to something somewhere, but I don't really have to care about how that works, and I just need to turn this dial or step on the gas pedal and the car runs, you know, and you don't have to really know about like internal combustion engines to like figure that out. It just reduces the amount of complexity you need to know. You just press something and it does something, and that's all you need to learn. So if you sat in a different car, like for example, this is from like a 1950s car or something. If you sat in a new car, there might be a bit more buttons, but you'd be able to figure out what functions you need to play with to interact with that interface. But what's behind it could be totally different. You know? And so that's what's considered front-end development. Back-end development is actually the back end of this radio. So when you touch the knobs, it's, you know, touching somewhere in here that gives a signal that says, you know what, adjust the volume, increase, you know, whatever to make the volume louder. And I don't know how exactly that works, but this is just an analogy. And throughout all my analogies, if you take them too far, they stop working. So take it, you know, with a dash of salt here and there, but just to get the concept behind it. And so behind the radio, we could use a variety of languages to accomplish the same thing in our web world. So the language we're choosing is PHP because it has huge market share. But we could have taught you Java, we could have taught you Ruby on Rails, we could have taught you Node.js, but PHP is going to be here always. And that basically could replace this. And backend development, that's how we talk to databases, and that's how we talk to APIs, read, write files from the disk of the user or the server. And that's one of the limitations of JavaScript, where you can't take files from the client computer and then have it be accessible on the back end using just purely JavaScript. It doesn't know anything about the files on this particular computer, for example. It only has control or power in the browser itself. Anything outside the browser it doesn't know about. but that's outside the box JavaScript. Now Node.js, which is new, that can act as a backend, and it's all in one language. So we won't learn too much about that, but just be aware that other tools are on the market. So if you do hear about it, that's what they're talking about. So with databases, we're mostly going to be working with MySQL, but it belongs to a family which uses SQL to access it, which is sequential query language. And it's probably the most English-like language there is to learn, and it's very simple to access and write database to a database. And to reduce the complexity of what a database is, think of it as Microsoft Excel on steroids. And all it is to input data into each record is a layer of rules that it has to be a certain length, be between certain values. It just has a rules layer that you have to go through as a filter to accept it or reject it. And that's what basically a whole database does, is to keep your data clean based on a set of rules. So any questions regarding databases immediately?
Structured query language.
Sequential. I believe it's sequential query language.
Are we going to be learning SQL?
Yes, we will learn a little bit of SQL, but later on we'll be working more with the framework, because it provides an abstraction layer so that underneath it's creating the SQL, and we'll be working with the raw SQL initially just for you to understand it. But later on we're gonna not have to think about it, but know that at some layer the SQL is going to be there. Does that make a little sense, or no? Or do you need a little bit more clarity?
I'm thinking, I'm wondering if the SQL actually changes based on the database. Because I didn't have to do that in Volusion, but we had a guy who did SQL, so I'm a little familiar with it. So, I don't know, I'm excited to see what it turns out to be. So.
Well, typically there are different functions for different databases, but the main language itself, there's 4 different ways to access. There's select, update, delete. What's the 4th one, Brian? I forget.
Create, read, update, delete.
No. Select, insert. There it is. Select, insert, update, delete. Those are the main 4 functions of a database.
Okay.
So just talking to you, just maybe you reminded me. Yeah. So those are the 4 statements that we're mostly working with, and then a little bit about joining stuff and how databases are structured. Because the whole point of a database is to reduce redundancy, and for example, I have a list of employers and employees, and for every record in Excel, I don't want all the Acme employees are here, right? And the name Acme changes. I don't want to change it 5,000 times. I want to store it one time and use some number to represent Acme. So that even if the name changes, it doesn't matter. It'll get reflected in that update, as opposed to go 50,000 times. So that's the whole point of this database.
Okay.
So cool. And the advantage of databases is that you can use other software to connect with it and learn more about the data, and it's not tied to the life of the application. It can live outside of your application. But we'll get more into depth to that later. All right, so frameworks and libraries. Once we learn PHP and just raw JavaScript, we'll get into a lot of frameworks and libraries and what they do for us, what problems do they solve. An exercise I do want us to do is to be able to make a very, very 0.1 version of our own framework, just to know how it works and what exactly is it doing for us. So, more so on the PHP side, I just want you guys to be able to use JavaScript to manipulate things on the page, and it'll be simple exercise at first. But there's a lot of frameworks out there, and Laravel is one of the really big popular ones because of how easy it is to use. And so that was my focus on is just to reduce the cost of learning in the learning curve. But pretty much in every major language, there's some kind of framework, and what a framework is like buying your nails and timber from Lowe's, which is down the street, or Home Depot, and it's a certain standard size, as opposed to us making our own nails or like cutting our own wood and treating it. And it takes a lot of time, but also a lot of maintenance in the long run of having to, and we may not be able to anticipate things that's wrong in our code, but if it's used by 50,000 or plus people, it's been pretty much tested and tried and true. And so jQuery is a JavaScript framework library, and we're gonna be using that a lot more next week. It makes life a lot easier for us than writing raw JavaScript, and basically reduces our work to do certain tasks. And then we will also work with some JavaScript frameworks, but mostly Backbone JS. I think it's the oldest one, so it's a little bit more stable than something like Angular, which has a little bit different learning curve, but they basically all work the same way. So once you learn one, you basically learn them all. Does that give you a little bit of idea of what frameworks do and like why we need them and what they're all the rage about these days? So there you go. Yeah, so we haven't talked too much about this MVC model, but MVC stands for Model View Controller. It's just a way to design your application so that it's not all intertwined of a certain feature. You may have not seen this, but if you build a simple application, you pretty much keep your stuff clean and separate. But when things get more complicated, you want to have some kind of structured way so that another developer or you guys could walk in there and say, I want to add this feature, and here's what I need to do, versus having to like figure out how the application works. So MVC is just a pattern of a way of doing things. And let's see. Yeah. So frameworks do a lot of heavy lifting for us. It's proven code that a lot of developers trust and use, and they make things easier for us to do, like blogs or create basic CRUD applications, which is a lot of times we're just creating things like creating a new entry to our employees table or our employers table or whatever we're building, whatever application, even Facebook. We create a user, we read their Facebook statuses, we update that status whenever they change or edit something, and then we delete stuff based on user requests. That's most of what business applications are, just CRUD apps. That doesn't mean they're cruddy, but that's just the acronym we use. So to give you a little bit insight of what MVC is, a request comes from users, either a device or computer or something, and it gets captured by this controller, which just responds to it. And then the controller polices what should I do next. Should I go to the database? And that's in the model representation. And then once I go to the database, and then I'm going to capture that data, and I'm going to send it to the view, which is our HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc., and then send that back to the user. So this is pretty much what, instead of a 30,000 foot, this is like a 60,000 foot view of what happens. Any particular questions about MVC?
What exactly do you mean by model?
Model, this could be a database, this could be an API. This dictates what happens next. Let's say that this request, I have a form of something that says send me a text message to such and such a number, and this is the text I want to send. So here it says, okay, so you have a valid message. It is at least 5 characters long, or whatever you would decide as a programmer. I'm going to call Twilio or whatever API, or grab it from my database, and then once I get that data, or call Twilio, I get a success message or something. And then I tell the user your text is successfully sent. Does that break it down a little bit? Yeah. All right. So I know some of this may be looking like you're drinking out a fire hose, but I promise we'll slow down a little bit where we need to. But typical path is that you learn HTML first, and then some CSS, some JavaScript, and the backend language, which is pretty much exactly what we're doing in that order. And then you choose what you want to specialize in. And I am more of a back-end person. So I deal more with creating APIs, talking to APIs, the data model, and how is that, how do we protect what gets inserted into our database, and giving structure to an application, like how do we do this, how do we lay it out. Versus a front-end person, which all they focus on mostly is the HTML, CSS, how does it look, do I need to move this thing over 10 pixels, 5 pixels, whatever number of pixels, and how do I optimize the graphics, that loads fast enough. And typically the front-end people, they know a lot more like Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that to make graphics. And it's very rare, but people are expecting a bit more of both to be what's known as a full stack developer, which means you know it from A to Z. And everyone's going to have a different level of proficiency there. And I find those people are super rare, so I call them unicorns, that they know both equally well. So don't feel bad if you are stronger on one side and not the other. It just depends on how you think. And to me, front end challenges, it's a different type of problem solving. You're solving like branding, you're solving like what the customer likes, aesthetics, and it's kind of hard to screw up the back end, which is why I like it, because if it either works or it doesn't. Versus I like this design, but it needs to pop. Like what was needs to pop mean? And I just would go crazy if I was a front end person.
Have you seen that oatmeal comic about like what client says they want, and you give them that, and then they're like, no, I want something like this. And it's just a bunch of like gifs and like flash.
It's like the original site all over again.
Yeah.
I think I've seen the Oatmeal's a great comic site, and I also like XKCD.
XKCD.
Yeah, so I'll be using some of those in XKCD in the slides here, just to reinforce some concepts. But yeah. So you guys have any questions about what your typical path is? Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much the last slide of this one. Just any questions overall? I mean, I'm excited for you guys. Like I said, we're gonna run up to what your barriers are, limit your limits to your knowledge, and just build you some muscle around that. But I will be needing your email addresses to add you to Canvas, where I'll be assigning things, and you'll be able to like provide the homework, submit the homework via online submission, like either a URL or text entry. Today it'll be like more definitions, and then after lunch we'll be setting up our environments, and then we'll be creating our first forms. See what you know and what you don't know. Go ahead and write your email address, and I'll send out that email.